This section is going to be all about the composition of bone and all about bone biology. We already know that bone has to have cells in it, and it also needs to contain matrix because we talked about the fact that bone is a connective tissue. And when you have connective tissue, you have cells and you have matrix surrounding those cells. The matrix in this case will have both organic and inorganic components. The inorganic components are going to be the minerals, specifically calcium and phosphorus. They are combined into calcium phosphate in bones. The organic part will be collagen. Remember how high a tensile strength collagen has. Some non-collagenous proteins and what are known as mucopolysaccharides, which are these giant glucose-based molecules. Now, when it comes to the cells, there are several different types that you need to know. The osteoprogenitor cells, which give rise to osteocytes and osteoblasts. Actually, in order, it should be osteoprogenitor, osteoblasts, and osteocytes. And then you have another lineage of osteoclasts, which actually arise from phagocytic cells. Osteoclasts will have a phagocytic function. Remember when we talked about histology of connective tissue when we talked about mesenchyme? And that is sort of those undifferentiated, unspecified cells that give rise to all connective tissue. The osteoprogenitor cells arise from mesenchyme. They undergo mitosis and they become what are known as osteoblasts. And I always, to remember these, I would think osteoblasts are baby bone cells. Osteoblasts are going to lay down what is known as osteoid, and we'll talk more about that in a minute or two. They are actually forming the bone matrix that is going to be made up of collagen. They're secreting collagen. The mineral salts, calcium and phosphate, will fill in around the collagen fibers after the initial matrix is laid down. The osteoblasts will morph into what are known as osteocytes, C-Y-T-E-S, which are mature bone cells. And their job is to maintain basically the bone matrix that is around them. And you will recall that osteocytes are going to live in those little pockets known as lacunae. If the bone is damaged, osteocytes can revert back into osteoblasts in order to lay down more matrix in order to repair the bone, which is totally cool, actually. It's totally super cool. So let's take a look at this because you can see the osteoprogenitor cells up top, which are developing into osteoblasts, which are going to lay down those collagen fibers, which provide scaffolding for the entire matrix. And then some of those osteoblasts are going to differentiate into those mature bone cells, which will maintain the bone matrix, which are known as osteocytes. Now take a look-see and see how they have those long processes that are sticking out around the cell. Those are going to be important for intercellular communication. So hang on to that thought. This shows you a developing lacunae. This shows you osteoblasts. This shows you what are known as circumferential lamellae, fancy word for saying layers. And you can see some really, really fine hair-like structures, which are known as the canaliculi. Just another shot of developing bone. You can see the osteoblasts laying down bone matrix. You can see osteocytes, which are living in their little pockets, the lacunae. And you can see that cartilage is calcifying in this one. This is the shot of an embryonic skeleton. It's totally cool. In addition to the osteoblasts and osteocytes, which lay down and maintain bone matrix, we have the osteoclasts, which are these giant multinucleated cells. And again, they are derived from macrophagic cells. they are going to be very important for breaking down bone matrix. So why do we care? Why would we want to break down bone matrix? Don't you want to build bone? Well, we do. And we also want to take bone away from places where we don't need it. So it is a really fine and completely fascinating balance between the osteoblasts, the osteocytes, and the osteoclasts in terms of maintaining our skeletal structure. So we have bone matrix when and where we need it, and we have sufficient amounts of calcium and phosphorus in our blood in the appropriate concentrations. And these cells do this amazing dance to maintain our physiology perfectly on a daily basis. It's just astonishing to me. That shows you an osteoclast. You can see that they are big, big, big cells, and again, they are multinucleated. And it just shows you some osteocytes also. I mentioned osteoid before. Osteoid is the beginning of the matrix that is laid down by osteoblasts. It is primarily collagen. It does become calcified, and as it calcifies, those osteocytes will be housed within the lacunae, within the bone. Again, remember we have an inorganic component to bone matrix, which will be the hydroxyapatite, calcium phosphate. It can be called hydroxyapatite, it can be called calcium phosphate, and either is fair game on an assessment or in homework, so make sure you understand that. Don't worry, I won't put a diagram on an assessment like the one on the left and say, well, identify each of these. But you should be able to tell me hydroxyapatite is calcium phosphate.